Hello and welcome to the Nano Film Improv podcast. I'm Dave Heron. This podcast is about my trials and tribulations associated with improv comedy and doing it, performing it, rehearsing it. So this is really a cathartic outpouring of the things that I've learnt, the things that I'm struggling with, and an opportunity to share with you and hear from you also some of the things that have worked for you, and equally there'll be some things on this podcast that you have tried that don't work for you. It's all very subjective. My experience level is, well, I've had a few years experience doing improv. I've taught a bit of improv. I've performed with a whole range of exciting and talented improvisers and learnt from sets that have gone well and sets that haven't gone well. And this is all part of an evolution for me as well. So you're very welcome in joining me on this podcast. So this week I am joined by my first ever guest on this podcast. I'm joined by the wonderful improviser, teacher of improv, and just bloody good friend, George Butcher. Hello, George.
Hi, David. Nice to be with you. It's a heck of an intro.
It was a long old intro, wasn't it? I'll have to edit this down.
I enjoyed the friend bit. I felt I could live up to that.
Yeah. Always room for improvement, isn't there? Always room. As part of this podcast today, I would like to understand a little bit about what you enjoy about improv and what aspects you find challenging, and just really kind of take it from there, really.
I imagine, like a lot of people, finding things challenging is quite fun. So there should be quite a bit of crossover there between things I enjoy and things I find challenging, I'd imagine.
Is that a facet of improv you quite enjoy then? Is the challenge and something that doesn't come naturally part of the fun?
Well, I think if you learn anything, it's fun. Is that what draws me to improv in particular? Partly. Improv is it's like any art, really. I enjoy lots of other types of art. I think lots of people do, but I'll analogize it to photography. You can take a really good photo, and you can always improve that really good photo. Framing could be better, the light could be better, shade could be better, or what have you. And photographers who go to extreme lengths and visit extreme places to just get that next best shot that they could be proud of. And I think it's the same with an improvised scene, that you can do the most perfect scene, but you will still go to the most extreme lengths to get the next one, that next rush of look at this thing that I've made, that you can be proud of and think, oh, I'm really happy with the artistry of that. And that's challenging, right? So that part challenge is part of that. If somebody presented you with just the opportunity to take the perfect photo, you lose something there. I think being challenged to produce it is part of the art itself.
Is there a bit with improv where there's a quest for perfection, and we all kind of know that there's very, very few of us who will ever get to that nirvana point. But is that part of would you say that's part of it, or do you have a different take?
I don't think I agree with the perfection thing. I think it's more like you're chasing a high. I don't think you can get a perfect scene in the same way that you can't get a perfect photo, but you can get one that you just spot that you've done an element of it brilliantly, and that gives you that rush of endorphins that you just want to think, oh, I'm good at this, I can do this, and other people have enjoyed it. I've shown it to other people and they've appreciated what I've been going for. I've really done that well, and that's a great feeling. Being appreciated by other people is a great feeling. It's a very human experience, and it's very something that we all chase, be it in performance or other people. And some of us, unfortunately, are clearly born with this gene that means that we need other people to say, yes, you've done excellently there. And that gives us this enormous pleasure that other people have recognized these things that we've done. And it's very sort of self-centered in a way. I'm not sure that it's a good trait, but it's a trait that I've definitely got. So I better learn to live with it.
I make myself feel better that it's a shared trait with other people as opposed to stand-up or indeed a monologue, which can be quite, as you described, quite sort of, look at me seeking approval. I think I completely agree. I think that we do seek approval still, but it's within the confines of a collaborative shared experience, and that I get a lot of pleasure from that. Where do you said about chasing the high, getting your endorphins. What sort of things on stage? Is it the laugh? Is it something more clever? What sort of things do you get your high from when you're on stage?
You know what? Weirdly, it's not the laugh. I used to think when I was doing improv, so I started off at university doing improv, and sort of when I was back then, everything was new, so it was all a learning experience. And I used to think that it was the laugh that I was chasing. And absolutely, you get if an audience laughs at something you said, it's a wonderful feeling. But now I don't think it is that so much. I think it's the greatest joy I get at an improv stage is being on stage with someone that I know and I've worked with before, and just taking a scene outside of its comfort zone a little bit and being able to see in the eyes of the person I'm on stage with this little glimmer of, oh no, what have you just done? And watching them recognize that I've just twisted a scene somehow, and then them realizing that I've put both of us on stage into a situation where we're going to have to get out of it. And that sort of riding the wave of the improv scene, not playing within ourselves, not going for the easy jokes, but putting ourselves and the person you're on stage with that you know into a situation that you know is just suddenly difficult, and that we're both going to have to work to the top of our sort of intelligence, both as characters and as improvisers, to get out of it. That that challenging of myself with a teammate, I really enjoy, and you get that in all sorts of things in life. I think everybody enjoys when they've got someone that they know and like, and they're given a challenge that they've got to work at, because it means you can really apply your full self to it to try and solve the problem. Just not, you don't have to hold back. You don't have to, wait for somebody else to catch up. No, you're really in a situation that's a problem, and you have to apply everything you've got to try and solve it. And an improv scene, you have to apply everything you've got immediately, right then, to solve it. And I really enjoy that. It's difficult, of course, because you've got to do it with someone who you know feels the same as you. And equally, I enjoy being put in that situation. So if the other person I'm on stage with does the same thing to me, and I recognise that they've done it, I really enjoy that on stage as well.
So you're a bit of an adrenaline junkie when it comes to sort of the challenge on stage. I mean, I was smiling there just thinking about what you were saying, and it reminded me of plenty of scenes that we've done, either a slapbot or in our two prov. I mean, certainly one on the two prov where there'd been plenty where I just remember you looking at me on stage with a raised eyebrow, and I knew a challenge of some description was about to be heading my way. And I think one that springs to mind right now was the one where we were on stage. It was a ding jam at the wonderful Dingbats in Hawley, and we were in the middle of a set, and we were two, I think, princes or kings looking out onto the audience who we had endeared with being the crowd, the royal subjects. And at some point, you then left the stage and went into the crowd with a look of sort of a glint in your eye. And I knew. Now it was a funny thing because you do say it was a challenge. And it was a challenge, but what I really enjoy doing with you in improv scenes, and what the joy of doing improv with you is it's not just being thrown into the challenge, but it's also having the comfort and assurance that I'm with someone on stage who's very good as well. So it doesn't feel like you would have at a jam or when you were starting out with doing improv where you would be, oh goodness me, I don't know what I'm going to be doing. Being in that situation and knowing that together we will solve this problem. There's a complete assurance and level of comfort.
I think that's a really important part of it. The danger with enjoying that challenge on stage is that improvisation ultimately is a supportive art form. It's a team effort. I mean, very unlike photography in some respects, it's really important to remember that improv is collaborative, not a solo thing. And the danger with challenging yourself and other people on stage is that if you do it in the wrong sense, it won't feel collaborative. It will feel that you've just put your scene partner in trouble. And that's absolutely not it. It's very much I've put us both in trouble. I will help us get both of us out of it, done with the scene partner's permission. And I think an audience really enjoys watching that. I think an audience can tell. when an improviser is performing within themselves and just doing something that they've done 1,000 times before. And that can still be enjoyable. Absolutely, it can, especially if it's something the improvisers are good at. But there was a special joy in improvised comedy for me in watching someone get pushed outside of what they've done before. And actually, it's the reason I do improv, like, summed up, really, because I can't think of many other art forms where the person performing the art is you watch them live be pushed out of their comfort zone. Films, they get many takes. Theatre, it's they've rehearsed it time and time again. They know exactly what they're going to do. I guess the closest thing is sport, but even then, it's not quite the same. There's always a shared goal there, and improvised comedy, in that sense, is one of the only mediums where you can have performers on stage given a problem to solve regularly as part of the performance, and you get to see that problem solving happening, and I really like that.
So it's a bit of a triumph over adversity. I know that you and I did a short form course for Dingbats in 2023, and I remember when we were planning that course and talking about it, we were sat out actually out in your garden there talking about, if we had to set out key principles at the beginning of what we believe short form is. I think we called it was IPA. It was impressive, playful, and audience aware. But there's an element.
Well remembered.
Yeah, well, the IPA bit helps. There's obviously an alcoholic reference there, isn't there? But the clearly I was going to go there. It was either a food or drink related mnemonic. But that balance of playfulness, and I've talked about it before on the podcast, the balance of playfulness, but the triumph over adversity. And actually, it doesn't matter whether you triumph or not. It's the playfulness, and if you can, people want to see you giving it a go. A bit like, as you say, with sport. You might support if you're a football supporter like me, and you're a Spurs supporter. You're never going to be celebrating any silverware anytime soon. But what you want is you want your team to at least come off having tried hard, right? Seen the challenge in front of them and done their very best.
Yeah,
That's what people
absolutely.
almost, I think, want to see as well. Clearly, they want to see a bit of playfulness. But I do also think the challenge, you say, the challenge being presented there and the improvisers doing their level best to try and overcome whatever that challenge is, whether it's, a relationship or
I'm competitive. I'm competitive by nature. For better or worse, it infiltrates most parts of my life. That competition seeps in, but I try and make the most out of it. And I think competitiveness has a lot to give, as long as it's done supportively. And I think that's really, you don't want to be a bad winner or a bad loser in any scenario, but being competitive is good. So I try to encourage competition sort of everywhere I can, as long as it comes across as supportive and not. You don't want it to be draining either. You've got to get the level right, and you have to be aware of that. But certainly in a performance scenario, I think that sort of wanting to push yourself can be really valuable. And it's really interesting. I've seen a lot of improv performers shy away from that. And I guess that would be a really interesting conversational route to go down, because accepted wisdom, I would expect, is that when you're doing a show that people have paid for, the one thing you want to be sure of is that it's a good show, which inherently makes you want to stay within what you know you can do well. But for me, the joy of improv comes from pushing yourself outside of that comfort zone, which of course comes inherently with the risk that it might not be a very good show.
When I think back to the show that Slapbot did earlier this year called Dreamland, I remember the very opening part that we did was Revolver. It was the game Revolver. And the first scene I did was with Martin, who's in Slapbot as well. And I think the suggestion had been Milkmaid. And I remember looking at him, going down on one knee and pretending to milk a cow, but just eyeballing Martin. And that in itself was a bit of a challenge. But knowing that the people you're doing it to want to be pushed outside of their comfort zone and know that they can overcome that is part of the competitive, the competitive, but also camaraderie within the group as well. When you think about, actually, while we're talking about competition in improv, what's your thoughts on theatre sports? Do you like it?
So you're talking about the Keith Johnson format, still trademarked, I think. You probably can't perform theatre sports as theatre sports without getting the licensing for it, which is, I think, incredibly impressive for what is an improvised format. And there isn't another one that I know of that's trademarked in the same way. I like the idea. Look, ultimately, I think theatre sports, like all improv, can be misunderstood. And therefore, whether it's you see a good performance of theatre sports or not very much depends on who you see perform it and whether they've understood the principles behind it. I think there's a real danger in suggesting that any improv format is particularly good or particularly bad, because every improv format that you've heard of is good, because that's why you've heard of it. Whether the version of it you saw was good is very much down to who you saw, not down to the format itself. So I think people get hung up on improv formats and think, oh, should I be doing a Harold? Should I be doing a LaRonde? Should I be doing whatever it is? And the ultimate truth is you've got to just get rid of all of that knowledge in a sense. So you should be doing something that your audiences enjoy watching you do and that you enjoy performing. And if one of those two things isn't there, you should stop doing it. And I don't think there's any benefit to be guessing going, well, the Harold definitely worked for this group. It's a really famous improv format, so it can't be the format's fault. It must be me. Well, maybe you don't fit with the Harold and maybe trying to force yourself into a format that exists.
Do you have a favourite type of format of improv? Is there something you naturally gravitate towards?
The thing I value most is the ability to tell a story. Actually, not to go too deep, but I suspect that's one of the things I value most in life. Really, I would love, in an ancient life, I would have loved to have been a bard, a travelling storyteller. Just one of the most noble professions as far as I'm concerned. I think you can learn an awful lot from a story. And I'm a science teacher by employment, so you'd think I'd place an awful lot of stock in facts and figures and knowledge, but actually, I think you learn an awful lot more about the human psyche and the human soul and the stories that get told than the facts and figures that surround them. So I really value that. It's something that I really care about and want to see passed on, and part of the joy I find being on stage. So what do I gravitate to in improv? Telling stories. Now, what format that comes in, there's a huge range. It could be a full narrative play, or it could be Story Die as a short form game where you tell a story with a group of other improvisers, but it's very much a sort of short game. But both of those are telling stories, and both of them have their own joy to them. And even a simple scene on stage has a story to it, even if it doesn't go beyond one scene. So every time I think about that question, what would be my favourite scene that I would gravitate to in improv, I would always tell you some sort of narrative piece, telling a story. Unfortunately, I'm not very good at it. Certainly not acting it out. There's facets to telling a story in an improv scene that are really hard to get good and funny and get them to work. And I guess that's for a long time been the challenge and something I find fascinating. I can do it off stage. I can tell quite a good story off stage. I can link ideas together. I can see where the story's going. But getting four other people on stage to be on the same wavelength as you and to be telling the same one is a different matter entirely. And I still find it a struggle when I'm on stage when two other people take a story in a different direction that I wasn't expecting. Adapting to that on the fly is hard work.
I completely agree. I think when I think about when I was younger, I was always drawn to Friends. I certainly got one guy in mind, a chap called Daniel Church, who was a friend of mine, still is a friend of mine, who was brought up in Inverness. And I remember meeting him at university my first week there, and I was utterly drawn to him because of the stories that he would tell. I also had a friend called Charlie Hill who went to Eton, and I was a very state school, born and bred. But he was an excellent storyteller as well. And then when I went and finished my degree, I remember, so my degree was in physics. And to your point, it's very difficult for scientists, I think, to tell stories typically because they're things are very factual based, even in the ordinary world of work. But the best lecturers were those that could distill very technical things into very layperson language and give the narrative and reasoning behind it. Even in real life, it's very difficult for people to tell coherent stories. But doing that on stage in a way that you can articulate that to others and share that same thought structure with others is exponentially more difficult and just takes a lot of practice, I guess.
In the spirit of telling stories, I would you like to hear one?
Yes.
I'll tell you one of the worst gig that I've ever performed in.
Is this one up to you and I in it? Is it? Should I prep
No,
myself?
it's not at all. It's
Yes, please. Let's hear
it's
an example.
significantly worse than the ones we've done. The one
Oh
I'm
wow! It must have been.
you
Jeez.
do yourself down.
Yeah.
The gig that I'm talking about ended in a hospital.
And that wasn't a location given by an audience member.
No, absolutely not. It was a real hospital. I mentioned earlier. I haven't mentioned yet. I started improv at uni, and we used to perform in the university. I was going to call it a canteen. Then it's not a canteen at a university. It's a bar, but it was a bar that had a show performance area. We used to perform in there relatively regularly. It was almost once a week at one point. And we had a university improv society. It was the Holloway Players. So I went to Royal Holloway University, the least London of all the London universities. Claims itself as a London university. It's based in Egham. We just got into the habit of performing a lot of gigs, and we were trying to expand our range. So we wanted to perform outside of our normal slot in as many different places as we could. So we booked into another bar, still a campus bar, but not the one we normally performed at. And they were doing, it was a sort of student union celebration, and they were celebrating all of the different things that went on campus. And we were part of that. And so we booked ourselves a slot, and there were all sorts of acts going on before us and after us. And we had our 20-minute, let's show what we can do slot. I was in charge. I was the guy running it somehow for my sins. I had my friend there called Jack who was helping me run it, and we were the two old hands. And by old hands, I mean we'd been doing it a year at this point because everybody else had been doing it for 2, maybe 3 months. And we picked the most talented of them, and we put together this set. And we were knowledgeable at the time. You can imagine us sitting in a small porter cabin that the university used for lecture halls, quite cold because it's winter time, frost on the windows, and a small portable heater that Jack had brought with him, one of those electric ones that you plug in. And we're sitting around putting this set together, going, "Oh, freeze tags are games that always gets them laughing," and we're very good at, change or new choice, and sound effects we were quite good at as a game. We put together this little set and we honed it. We got everybody in for this rehearsal and we practiced it, and we were really good. In life, sometimes you're not in control of everything. We turned up to the show to find that the stage didn't exist. What we had actually been given was a microphone stand in a corner of a very crowded and not at all quiet bar. We said, "Hello, we're the Holloway Players. We're going to do some improv for you." And one person who was closest to us looked over their shoulder to see who was talking. The guy was quite aggressive, so as he turned around and told us to shut up, he sort of looked at us a little bit, and one of our performing members took a step back and slammed his head against the sort of door jamb. There was some piece of metal sticking out of it. The door had been propped open. We were right up against the corner, and it blooming split open and started pissing blood everywhere, all over I would say the stage, but there wasn't one. So it was just all over the floor. He's touching the back of his head and his hands coming away. It's covered in blood. Now, you'd have thought at that point that we wouldn't have performed any of the games. But we were young and we were confident and we were there to show off our skills. So we went ahead and tried to perform freeze tag. With one of our members fully bleeding from the head, nobody paying any attention to what we were doing. "Can we have a position from the audience, please? Maybe a letter of the alphabet?" No one paid any mind to us. We did a full 20-minute set, and when we left, we drove Josh straight to the hospital. There was a challenge, and then there's a challenge too far. What I learned, you know what? I didn't learn anything from that, in that sense. it has given me enormous confidence. All of us got a sense from that performance that it couldn't possibly go any worse. I mean, it's pretty difficult to get worse than a head wound. Normally, when you get on stage, the worst that could happen isn't a physical injury. We all made the decision that that was probably the worst gig that we could ever perform at. If there was a lesson from it, it's be careful where you perform. And I guess, to be fair, to this day, I have a pretty firm opinion that if you're going to perform an improv comedy set, it should be on an improv comedy stage where people know what they've come to see. Do not have them standing facing the other way towards a populated bar where there's loud music still playing. Oh, did I mention they never turned the music off? So we were battling with the music as well. So that don't do that. Don't do that as a setting. I've never been as nervous getting on stage again after that.
What is the lesson from that?
It was a very clear indication of, well, that's the worst it could go, and you've lived, and here you are still enjoying what you're doing and doing it.
It's interesting you say that. I had an experience with stand-up mainly, not with improv, of doing gigs where no one laughed. I've done a gig in 2001 in a gay bar in Soho wearing drag. It went badly. It just went badly. I was going to say badly wrong.
Was it the fault of the stand-up or the drag?
Everything was bad. The set was just really bad. The only joke I had was a comeback to somebody who I spent the first minute or so
You must
mucking
have
around.
had jokes.
They were bad jokes. They were rubbish jokes. And I spent the first minute strutting about, moving the microphone around. And someone said, "That's 30 seconds already." And I said, "Oh, you would have come by now." And I got a laugh, and the rest of the set just died. I think, given where we are with time, I think we can probably call this an end. But I did want to say thank you very much for your time. Thanks for the insight that you've shared with us.
You're very welcome.
So thanks very much for listening to the Nano Film Improv Podcast, and I'll catch you in the next one.